My wife served me divorce papers while I was paralyzed in rehab. She took my 3 kids and ran off with her trainer. But 4 years later, I won $850K and rebuilt everything. Now she's back, begging, and what I did left everyone speechless. I'm 42 years old. I work in events now, and I need to tell this story because 4 years ago I basically lost everything. My health, my family, my dignity, everything. And yet here I am, on the other side, with a life that honestly I never thought I could have. The thing is that when you're at the bottom, like really at the bottom, you don't see a way out, you know what I mean? And I was there, in that place where you think that's it. This is all you have left. But well, I guess I should start at the beginning, when I was still a construction supervisor and my life was, let's say, normal. I had been working in construction since I was 20, had been climbing up little by little until I became a site supervisor. And honestly, I liked my job. You know, being outside, seeing how buildings took shape, managing a team. I had been married to Sharon for like 15 years. We had 3 kids, Charlotte, who was 12, Alexander, who was 11, and Hazel, who had just turned 7. We lived in Illinois, a nice house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but comfortable. And I thought we had a good life. I mean, we weren't rich, but we didn't lack anything either. Sharon worked part-time in an office, the kids went to good schools, Alexander played soccer, Charlotte was on the debate team, Hazel was always drawing everywhere. It was that typical middle-class life you see in movies, I guess. Looking back now, I think Sharon was already distancing herself, even before the accident. There were small signs that I didn't want to see, like she was spending more time at the gym. She was always on her phone. When I got home tired, she seemed annoyed instead of, I don't know, normal. But I was working a lot of hours. We had a big project, a 4-story office building downtown, and the pressure was intense because we were behind schedule and the client was on top of us all the time. So I'd get home exhausted and wouldn't pay attention to those things. I thought it was stress from her too, that the kids were driving her crazy, the typical excuses you make up when you don't want to see the obvious. The accident happened on a Wednesday in October. I remember it perfectly because it was my brother Jason's birthday, and I had planned to leave early to go have dinner with him. It was like 3 in the afternoon. I was inspecting the second-floor scaffolding, checking that everything was properly secured before the team started working there the next day. And the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital 2 days later. Turns out the scaffolding was improperly installed. The company had used old equipment that didn't meet safety standards, and it basically gave way underneath me. I fell from 2 stories up, landed on my back on a pile of steel beams that were on the ground. I broke 3 vertebrae, fractured my ribs, had a severe spinal cord injury, and when I finally woke up, the doctor told me, with that face doctors make when they have to give you bad news, that I might never walk normally again. That in the best-case scenario, I was going to need crutches or a cane for the rest of my life. You can't imagine what it feels like to hear that when you're 38 years old, have 3 kids to support, and your job depends completely on your physical ability. I lay there in that hospital bed, connected to 1,000 machines, unable to move without feeling unbearable pain. And all I could think about was how the hell I was going to support my family now. Sharon came to visit me at first, brought the kids on weekends. But even from those first days, I noticed there was something weird. Like she would stand near the door as if she wanted to leave. She checked the clock every 5 minutes. She barely touched me. The kids were scared. Hazel cried every time she saw me. Alexander didn't know what to say and just stood there awkwardly. Charlotte tried to be strong, but I could see the fear in her eyes. And Sharon, well, Sharon basically acted like I was a stranger. I spent 2 months in the hospital, and then they transferred me to a rehab facility where I was going to be for at least another 3 months, doing intensive physical therapy, trying to recover some mobility. The pain was constant, like having a knife stuck in your back 24 hours a day, and the therapy sessions were torture. They literally made me cry from pain, but I had to keep going because it was my only chance to walk again. Sharon came less and less. At first, it was 2 or 3 times a week, then once, then nothing. The kids stopped coming completely, and when I asked her about it, she said it was too difficult for them to see me like that it was traumatizing them. I begged her, told her I needed to see them, that they were the only thing keeping me wanting to move forward, but she always had an excuse. And then one day, it was a Tuesday morning, I was in the middle of a particularly brutal therapy session, trying to take 3 steps with a walker, sweating, and shaking from the effort, and this guy comes in with a briefcase and tells me he has to deliver some papers to me in person. Divorce papers. Sharon was asking me for a divorce, and she didn't even have the decency to tell me in person. She sent me the papers with a process server while I was in rehab, unable to walk, without a job, completely vulnerable. In the papers, she was requesting full custody of the kids, the house, the car, basically everything, and cited as the reason that I could no longer provide for the family and that my condition was going to be a financial and emotional burden for everyone. I broke down right there, in the middle of the therapy room, in front of all the other patients and therapists, and I cried like I hadn't cried in years. Maybe ever. It wasn't just tears. It was that kind of desperate crying where you can't breathe and you feel like you're going to drown, where your whole body shakes and you can't stop. My therapist, an amazing woman named Denise, who was like 60 years old and had seen everything, hugged me and let me cry on her shoulder. And when I finally calmed down a bit, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "This isn't the end. It's the moment where you decide who you're going to be." And I didn't know at that moment what that meant, but I held on to those words like a lifeline. I tried to contact Sharon, called her like 50 times, but she wouldn't answer, sent her messages, emails, nothing. Finally, my brother Jason, who's an electrician and lives like an hour from where I was, went to the house and Sharon told him to his face that she already had someone else. A guy named Mitchell, who was 28 years old, was a personal trainer at the gym where she went, and that they had been together for months, even from before the accident. Jason told me over the phone, and I honestly don't know how I reacted. I think I just stayed silent processing the information, because deep down I already knew it. I had already sensed it. But hearing it out loud was different. What happened next was that Sharon literally took everything. She sold the house without consulting me. I mean, technically we were still married and it was shared property, but she sold it anyway, took the money, packed up all the things, and moved out of state, to Indiana, with Mitchell and my 3 kids. And I couldn't do anything to stop it because I was in a rehab facility, without legal resources, without money because the company's insurance barely covered medical expenses and I wasn't receiving a salary, without the ability to move. Jason hired a lawyer for me, a guy named Paul, who was a friend of his. But by the time we could start doing anything legal, Sharon had already left and the divorce process was underway. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the accident. I was living with Jason at that point, because when I got out of the rehab center, I had nowhere to go. Literally nothing. And Jason told me I could stay at his place as long as I needed. I still used a cane to walk, couldn't be on my feet more than 20 minutes without my back killing me, and my job prospects were basically zero. Sharon got full custody of the kids. I had visitation rights, but since she lived in another state and I had no car or way to travel, it was impossible. I asked her to at least let me talk to them on the phone, but she said the kids didn't want to talk to me, that she had asked them and they preferred not to have contact. 4 years went by without seeing my children. 4 years. I didn't hear their voices, didn't know how they were doing, didn't see photos. Nothing. I tried everything. Sent them letters that Sharon returned unopened. Sent birthday and Christmas gifts that I never knew if they received. Tried to contact them on social media, but Sharon controlled all their accounts. Jason told me to keep trying, not to give up. But honestly, there were moments where I thought about just disappearing, like going somewhere where nobody knew me and starting from scratch without looking back, because the pain of not having my children was worse than any physical pain in my back. But well, I had to make a living somehow. And it was Jason who saved me in that sense too. Like he literally forced me to get ahead when I just wanted to stay in bed all day. He worked doing electrical installations for events, weddings, conferences, that kind of thing. And he started taking me with him as his assistant. Simple tasks that I could do despite my physical limitation, like handling the paperwork, coordinating with organizers, that sort of thing. And it turned out I was good at it. Like really good. Because after years of being a construction supervisor, I knew how to organize projects, manage schedules, work with vendors, and those skills transferred perfectly to the event world. It was at one of those jobs where I met Angela. Jason was installing lights for a wedding at an elegant venue, and Angela was the owner of the catering service, working the same event. She was like 36 years old at that time, had started her catering business from scratch 5 years before, and she was one of those people who have incredible energy, the type who walks into a place and everything lights up. We started talking during the event setup. She asked me how I ended up working with Jason, and I don't know why, but I told her my whole story, the accident, the divorce, the kids, everything. Normally, I don't talk about those things with strangers, but there was something about her that made me feel comfortable. Angela told me something that day that stuck with me. She said that she had also gone through a difficult divorce, that she understood what it was like to start from zero when you feel like your life is destroyed, and that if I needed work, she was always looking for reliable people to help her with event logistics. I didn't give it much importance at the moment. I thought she was just being nice. But a week later, she called me and offered me a real job, coordinating events for her company, and I accepted because, honestly, I needed the money and the distraction. Working with Angela was probably the best thing that happened to me during those dark years. She was patient with my physical limitations, understood when I needed to take breaks because of back pain. But she also challenged me to be better, not to use my disability as an excuse not to try things. We started working together more and more, and after like a year, she proposed that we form a partnership, that we combine her catering business with my coordination skills and create a complete event planning company. I had my doubts, like I didn't have money to invest, and I was still dealing with a lot of emotional stuff. But Jason convinced me, said it was my chance to build something of my own. During all this time, I was also dealing with the legal case against the construction company. Paul, my lawyer, had filed a negligence lawsuit because the scaffolding that collapsed didn't meet safety standards, and the company knew it but had used it anyway to save money. The legal process dragged on for years. There were expert evaluations, testimonies, a ton of bureaucracy, and honestly, I didn't have much hope of winning because it was a big company with good lawyers, and I was just a broken guy who couldn't pay his medical bills. The relationship with Angela evolved gradually, so gradual that I didn't realize it until it was already happening. We spent all day together working. We started going out to dinner after big events to celebrate. She would come to Jason's house sometimes to plan things, and we'd end up talking late into the night about all kinds of topics. It was easy being with her. I didn't have to pretend to be okay when I wasn't. I could be honest about how much I missed my kids, about the days when the back pain was so intense I could barely move. And she never judged me or tried to give me advice I didn't ask for. She just listened. It went on like that for like 3 years, working together, building the business little by little, still living at Jason's house even though I was earning enough to move out on my own. But Jason insisted I stay, and honestly, the company did me good. Angela and I started an official relationship at some point. There wasn't a specific moment where we said this is what we are. It just happened, and it was different from what I had with Sharon, calmer, more honest, without games or drama. And then, 4 years after the last time I had seen my children, I received a call that changed everything. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered expecting it to be a client or vendor, and I heard a voice I recognized immediately, even though it had changed. It was more mature but still unmistakable. Charlotte. My daughter Charlotte, who was now 16 years old, had gotten my number through Jason and was calling me from her own phone, one that Sharon didn't control because she had bought it with money she had saved from working. I can't describe what I felt in that moment. It was like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone, and I could only say her name over and over. Charlotte, Charlotte, I can't believe it's you. She was crying too. Told me she had been looking for me for months. That Sharon had told them I had abandoned them. That I didn't want to know anything about them after the divorce. But that she had never quite believed it, and when she turned 16 and got her first job, she decided to look for me on her own. She told me that Alexander and Hazel also wanted to see me, that they didn't believe Sharon's version either, but they were younger and didn't know how to contact me. We coordinated a visit. Charlotte convinced Sharon by telling her they were going to the movies with some friends. But in reality, Jason picked them up and brought them to his house where I was waiting. Seeing my 3 children after 4 years was surreal. Charlotte was almost an adult, tall and confident. Alexander was 15 and was at that awkward age where boys are between being children and men, and Hazel was 11 and still looked like the little girl. I remembered, but bigger. They hugged me, all three together, and I cried so much I couldn't even talk. I just hugged them and thought, this is real. They're here. I didn't lose them forever. We spent the whole afternoon talking. They told me about their lives, school, their friends, their interests. And I told them my truth. Showed them all the letters I had sent them that Sharon had returned, showed them the gifts I had bought for their birthdays and could never send, explained to them about the accident, the rehab, how I had desperately tried to maintain contact, but Sharon hadn't allowed it. Charlotte told me she knew it, that she had always suspected Sharon was lying. Alexander was quiet, but you could tell he was processing everything, and Hazel just looked at me with those big eyes and kept saying, I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry. I told them about Angela, about the business we had built, about how I had been trying to rebuild my life while waiting for the day when I could see them again. Charlotte asked if they could visit me again, and I told her yes, always, as many times as they wanted. And we coordinated that we would see each other in secret every 2 weeks. Lying to Sharon wasn't ideal, but it was the only way to maintain contact with my children. The visits continued for months, sometimes all three together, sometimes just Charlotte because she was the only one with a car, and with each visit our relationship grew stronger. They met Angela and got along amazingly with her, especially Hazel, who had that instinct to know when someone is genuine. Angela taught them how to cook things from the catering. Alexander talked to her about soccer because it turned out she was a fan, and Charlotte asked her for advice about college and life, because Angela had that ability to give advice without sounding condescending. And just when things were starting to stabilize, when I felt like I was finally getting my children back, I got 2 pieces of news almost at the same time. First, Paul called me to tell me we had won the case against the construction company. The judge had ruled in my favor, and they were going to pay me substantial compensation for the injuries, loss of income, and pain and suffering. We're talking about an amount that would completely change my life. Second, Charlotte called me crying to tell me that Mitchell had left Sharon, basically left her for a TikTok influencer who was half his age. And Sharon was devastated and trying to reconnect with the kids now that her perfect life with her young boyfriend had gone to shit. The settlement from the lawsuit was like $850,000. After paying Paul's fees and some debts I had, there was like $600,000 left clean, and it was more money than I had seen in my life. Angela and I decided to expand the business. We bought new equipment, hired more staff, and I was finally able to move out of Jason's house to my own apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I also started saving money to eventually buy a bigger house, one where my kids could have their own rooms when they visited me. And then Sharon showed up at my office. It was like 3 weeks after Mitchell left her, and she didn't even let me know she was coming. She just showed up one day while I was reviewing contracts with Angela. She looked terrible. Honestly, she had lost that air of superiority she had always had, and she started talking non-stop about how she had made a mistake, that she should never have left, that Mitchell had manipulated her, that she wanted to rebuild our family, that the kids needed a stable home with both their parents together. I listened to her without interrupting, and when she finished, I just told her, no. Simple and direct. I told her that I had spent 4 years suffering, that she had taken my children away from me at the most vulnerable moment of my life, that she had lied about me to the kids, making them believe I didn't want them, and that there was no way in hell I was getting back together with her. I told her I had found someone who valued me, that I had a successful business, and that my kids already knew the truth about what had happened. Sharon got furious, started yelling that she was their mother, that I couldn't take them away from her, and Angela literally had to ask her to leave the office. After that, things accelerated. Charlotte turned 17 and told Sharon she knew the whole truth. Alexander also confronted Sharon, and Hazel, who was younger but still knew more than Sharon thought, told her she wanted to live with me. Sharon tried to forbid them from seeing me, but they were too old already, and when I finally hired a lawyer and requested custody review, Sharon didn't even show up to the hearing. The judge granted me full custody without any opposition. It was almost anticlimactic after years of fighting. I used part of the settlement money to buy a house with 4 bedrooms in Illinois, near where Jason lived. Each of my kids has their own space, and they moved in with me like 6 months ago. The transition wasn't perfect, like they had to adapt to a new school, to living with me after years of absence, to dealing with the fact that Sharon had basically imploded her life and had gone back to her hometown where she now works in a retail store and lives in a small apartment. The kids visit her sometimes. I don't want them to lose contact with their mother despite everything, but it's their decision when and how. Angela and I got engaged 2 months ago. It was something quiet, without drama. She was just in the kitchen making coffee one morning and she looked at me and said, "You know, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, right?" And I told her, "Yes, me too." And that was it. The kids are happy with the news, especially Hazel, who's already planning the wedding, even though we haven't set a date yet. The business is growing more than we expected. Last month we had 15 events, we're hiring 2 more coordinators, and Angela is considering opening a second location. My back still hurts. It's always going to hurt. There are bad days where I can barely move, but I've learned to manage it, to know my limits, and honestly, it doesn't define me like it used to. Last week, Charlotte and I were having breakfast. Just the 2 of us, because Alexander had early practice and Hazel was still sleeping, and she asked me if I ever thought things would end up like this. Like good. After everything horrible that happened, I told her the truth. That no. That there were years when I thought my life was over. That I would never see my children again. That I was going to die alone and broken. And she told me, "Dad, I'm glad you didn't give up." And I could only hug her and tell her that I could never have given up as long as I knew you were out there. It's not a perfect ending. There are still difficult days and things to process, but it's my life. I built it from the ashes, and that's enough.